I have lived in big houses. I have lived in little houses. And before I start sounding like a Dr. Seuss book, the purpose of this particular podcast today is to talk to you about homeschool organization in small spaces as opposed to large spaces where you have plenty of room to put all your stuff. Because I tell you what, I have had plenty of experience organizing homeschool materials in small spaces. Hello friends, welcome to the Raising Arrows podcast. I'm Amy Roberts from raisingarrows.net, and this is episode number 164, Homeschool Organization in Small Spaces. So I always like to start these podcasts out where I'm getting ready to tell you how to do something with a little bit of background so that you understand why I actually know what I'm talking about. I try very hard not to do podcasts about things I have no idea about. And so I want you to kind of know where I'm coming from and why this is something that I feel like I can speak to. Because honestly, I have only once had a dedicated homeschooling room. One time I did have like kind of a little nook that we used for homeschooling, but as far as an actual homeschool room, I have only had one house in which I had that opportunity, and frankly, we hardly used it because it was cold and it was a basement, and it was cold in that basement, and literally it ended up just housing our bookshelves and a table. We just didn't use that space very much. But to give you some background, like I said, the last house we lived in actually was a 3-bedroom home, and there were 11 of us living in a 3-bedroom home, no basement. All of our storage was in the garage, and we had to make very efficient use of every single space in that house. I have also lived in 2-bedroom homes when I had less children. And also there, I had to make use of the space that I had. Now back then, I didn't have as much stuff that had to be organized, but I've always tried to be very efficient with my organization so that it's at my fingertips what I need. And what I don't need right off is put away someplace where I don't have to look at it all the time. And that's kind of the key here, is to figure out those spaces in your house that can house and contain the things that you need regularly, and then a place where you can house and contain the things that you don't need as often. They're more like a storage and overflow, a place you can go to find the things that you need, to restock the place where you keep everything that you use on a daily basis. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is when you have a small space, you've got to organize it very neatly. We're going to talk about the spaces that you use all the time, and then also the overflow spaces. So first of all, years ago, I wrote a post about using backpacks and cubbies, I think is what I called them. And the reason for this is because at one point in time, I did use backpacks on the back of chairs for my children to house all of their notebooks, their pencils, any papers we were working on, any workbooks that they had, and even like textbooks that they had. And so they would put all of that stuff into a backpack and keep it on the back of the chairs where we were homeschooling. So in your dining room, or if you do have a dedicated space or an area where there's an extra set of table and chairs, to put them there as well. You also could have them hang those backpacks up on hooks that you have in a hallway, or even in a bedroom, or even in the dining room for that matter. We do a lot of homeschooling in the dining room, and so a lot of these tips are going to talk about the dining room, but also the living room, because for years that was where I did a lot of my homeschooling, because I had nursing babies, and that was where my chair was to sit and rock my babies. So I also had organization there next to my chair. So let's talk first about that storage place that you have where you're keeping all of the extra stuff, the things you are not using on a daily basis. These would be books that younger children are going to grow into. These would be supplies that you don't get out a lot. These would be things that you want to keep away from the children as well. It might be extra sets of scissors or crayons or markers, things like that, that maybe you don't want to have out all the time, but you need to have access to them periodically. Over the years, we have utilized what we called a homeschool closet. And basically, it was either a real closet that I was able to let go of and allow to be filled with homeschool supplies. That doesn't happen real often, especially with as many people as we have in this household. But occasionally, I would be living in a house that had lots of fantastic storage, and had some extra closet space that I could use to house supplies. The other thing that we called a homeschool closet was actually about a 4 or 5 shelf system that was plastic, hard plastic. It had doors on it. We would shut the doors. You could lock the doors if you wanted to. There was like a little hole where you could put a padlock through it. I never did that. But we also called that the homeschool closet. And it was a tall shelving system with doors. And that's where I would keep my big container of crayons. It's where I'd keep extra paper, extra school books, and things like that. That could be put anywhere. It could be put out in the garage. It could be put in a bedroom. It could even be put in the dining room where you're homeschooling all the time, because closed doors tend to make people think, well, I shouldn't open that. Whereas open shelves would make the kids more likely to get the things out, especially if they're just told, hey, that's the extra homeschool closet. Don't open that, only mommy gets in there. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is look for unique places to house that storage of homeschool curriculum. It might be there's a place under the stairs where you could put a few bookshelves or shelving systems and put those homeschool supplies under the stairs somewhere. We actually, in several of the houses we have lived in, have used the garage. We used to live in an area that didn't have basements, and so the garage was the only place I had to put those extra supplies. So I even had bookshelves out in the garage. I've had that homeschool closet in the garage. I've had shelving units where I put things out in the garage. Obviously, anything that's going to get too hot, if you live in a warm climate, should not be out in the garage. But if you're not putting a vehicle into the garage in and out frequently, then you don't have any of those exhaust fumes or anything like that that's going to mess with the materials out there. So as long as it's something that can stand some heat and some humidity possibly, you are fine to put those things out in the garage. And so we have done that, like I said, in several different homes because that was the only space I had. If you can spare an extra drawer, maybe even in your dresser, or an extra space in your closet up on the shelf, if you can put in like a Rubbermaid tub or something like that that you can pull out, it has everything in it, that is a great way to use some different spaces in order to store these extra homeschool supplies. Now, if you're like us, we have been homeschooling for 2 decades and I have acquired a lot of stuff. And so with a large family, you're always saving something for the next person. And so it might be a little more than what a little plastic tub can handle, but just keep looking for those places where you could put things. It might even be in a couple of bins underneath your bed. That's really a great unutilized space that you can use to store those kinds of things. And one other thought for those of you who live near family is to ask if you could use a section of their house, a closet here, a corner there, to put these extra books and supplies in, because that way it's out of your home, especially if you don't have a lot of space, but you're keeping it very neatly in their home. And make sure you do that. Make sure that you are very neat and tidy with how you organize and store those things, especially if you are asking someone else to be your storage place. Okay, let's move on to the things that you typically use on a regular basis. The first thing that I would highly encourage you do, and I actually have a video about this where I'm organizing this, is having a homeschool mom basket. In that video, I kind of just go through what's in the basket. I'm organizing it for you so that you can see the different pockets and nooks and crannies that I have in this basket. All of my homeschooling career, I have had in some form or another a homeschool mom basket. And when I was nursing babies, I also had a nursing mom basket that sat beside my chair. But the homeschool mom basket, it has always carried pencils, paper, pens, things that I need, workbooks, textbooks, things that I am going to be using with the kids, maps, lesson plans, bookmarks, whatever it is that I am currently using for that homeschool year goes into that homeschool mom basket. And yes, I have to go through the thing periodically because it will just become a dumping ground if you're not careful. But it is a great way to keep everything contained and organized. Currently, I am using a rectangular, kind of hard-sided. It's soft, but it's hard. Does that make sense? Anyway, it's from 31. And it is just kind of one of their containers that I have. And it's got some mesh pockets on the outside. and then I just can stack books inside of it, and it sits in the dining room where we do most of our homeschooling. At times we have done a lot of homeschooling in the living room, and I will also have a homeschool mom basket in the living room beside my chair with all of those things in it so that they're all within arm's reach. It is literally my right hand. It is the place that everything that I need is. I also keep most of our supplies contained, but not uber organized. So for instance, crayons are all dumped into one big plastic bin. Same with colored pencils, same with paintbrushes, same with anything that's like they go together in a dumping ground, literally, because children are not very good at neatly putting away things. Sometimes moms are not very good at neatly putting away things. So I wanted to make it super simple to be able to put these things away. With a big container of crayons, all they have to do is put the crayons back into the big container. With a Ziploc bag full of colored pencils, all they have to do is put the colored pencils back into the Ziploc bag. They don't have to organize them. They don't have to keep them neat and tidy. They just have to put them into the bag, and they can literally just dump them in. So that is a big organizational hack that I have as a large family, is that you are not going to be able to get the bulk majority of your children to put things back neatly. It will be maddening. So just go ahead and make dumping grounds, but separate them out by like things. In our dining room, where we do the bulk majority of our homeschooling, is a buffet. And that entire buffet, from the drawers to the doors to the bottom drawers, are filled with homeschooling things. There is nothing else in there except homeschool related stuff. That's where the construction paper is. That's where the hot glue guns are. That's where my laminator is. It's where workbooks go. It's where copy paper and cardstock are. So all of those things are in that buffet in the dining room. Is it pretty? No, but it's functional, and it's what I need to use that buffet for. So don't be hesitant to use actual furniture as a way to organize your homeschool materials. Maybe you have a china hutch that you could utilize in your dining room as a homeschool bookshelf, closet kind of thing in there right where you're at. Maybe you're homeschooling in the living room and you have a TV table or a TV armoire type thing that you can put things into that would be homeschool related, that would keep them right there in the living room for you. Maybe there's another section of the living room, an end table or something, where you could neatly stack things. Maybe you could put a bookshelf into the living room or even the dining room. We have had bookshelves in dining rooms for years because that's where most of our homeschooling happens nowadays. And so the books that are in the dining room are the ones that we are currently using. So utilize those pieces of furniture that are either already there, or add in some pretty pieces of furniture that will help contain the homeschool supplies and the homeschool paraphernalia in a way that's not an eyesore. So something we have done for years and years and years as a large family homeschooling in a small space is to utilize cubbies with baskets or soft-sided containers that slide into the cubbies. And each child has a cubby, and each child puts their things into the container, and that is where they are housed. We have done this in a couple of different ways. Currently, the cubbies are upstairs in a nook where the computer is. But up until last year, it was down in the dining room, and the kids just had the cubbies right there. They would pull out their supplies from the cubby and go sit down at the table to do their schoolwork every day. This is where their workbooks are, their literature books, their textbooks, their extra paper, and sometimes they've even got like projects and other supplies in there. I basically let them put whatever they wanted into there as long as it fit their school books, and as long as they periodically went through it. And finally, I'd encourage you to just think outside the box when it comes to organizing your homeschool supplies in a small space. For instance, for years we used backpacks, and they put all of their stuff into individual backpacks, and these were either slung across the back of their chair or they were hung up on hooks in the hallway, and all of their stuff was contained that way. I like to contain things by child in particular, because you have some children who are super messy and all of their stuff is hidden in a backpack, and you have some children who are super neat and it's no big deal to have their stuff sitting out. But this way, everything is contained and it's individualized, and they know what's theirs. They know that's my backpack and I can go get it and I'm ready to go for the school day. You may also want to look for spaces underneath furniture, underneath your bed, as I mentioned before, underneath their beds, so that they can just hide those supplies away and they're not always sitting out. When you think outside the box for homeschool organization, it's just like thinking outside the box for any of the organization that you have to do when it comes to living in a small home. You might have to utilize space way up high, put some shelving up along the top of the ceiling. You might have to utilize something like an attic or a basement or a garage, like I mentioned before. Get yourself some end tables that have doors on them and make those a place for you to put homeschool supplies. Get creative, think outside the box. Don't assume everything needs to be neatly and prettily arranged in little containers that have been decorated and they're beautiful. Kind of get rid of the Instagram feel or the Instagram notion that it has to look a certain way because you live in a small space. You don't have room for this. It's okay. You can find ways to hide those things away and still have a nice, neat home that doesn't look like it's a school all the time. Now, that said, in my dining room, there are maps on the walls. There is artwork on the walls. There are all kinds of things that scream that we are a homeschooling family in my dining room. And that is something that I have just chose to make peace with. Sometimes it's a great conversational piece for people who come into our home. They want to know what we're learning about and everything is right there and the kids can tell them. I do not have a problem with that. But if you do, find ways to contain those in a way that does not bother you, in a way that keeps the eye clutter down, and in a way that works with the space you have. If you don't want maps on the wall, use smaller maps and gather the children around and then put the maps away when you're done with them. If you don't want to have a bookshelf in the dining room, don't. Put it someplace where it makes more sense to you, and then you just have to walk in there and get the book. No big deal. And again, really consider how your brain works and the circumstances that you're in. For me, like I said, having those dumping grounds, those places where you've got a bag of colored pencils and a bag of markers and a box of crayons, for me that works because I know it's easier, it's faster, it's more efficient. It's something that I can take care of quickly, the children can take care of. It's not going to take a lot of hands-on time for me to get everybody to clean up school supplies. However, if your brain is much more organized and you don't mind doing those things, then go for it. Make some more pretty boxes and things like that for your homeschool supplies to go in. But don't knock yourself out trying to make things look a certain way when really what you need them to be is functional. So at the end of the day, the name of the game is functionality. Organize in a way that functions for you and your family, and don't worry about what it looks like unless it's bugging you. If it's bugging you, do something about it. There are lots of other ideas. Just think outside the box and make things functional. You are much more likely to keep things organized if it is functional for you and your family. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining me here at the Raising Arrows podcast, your home for all things large family homemaking and homeschooling. Bye-bye.